what I realized at this time was that the view I'd had of Christianity up until then was completely false. I came to find out, in fact, that most of Christianity, Catholicism, Protestantism, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, all of them have deep doctrinal flaws. What we have here in Sweden is hobby groups, not Christianity. Faith is not a feeling. Faith is a choice. Subjective morals leads people to be able to do whatever they want. If there is in fact no God, then you can do whatever you like. And I knew that the things that I was doing was in fact evil. As someone who's been lying, how am I to be able to trust myself on an issue so big as the truth of life? So what I needed to do was to look outside of myself for something greater than me. And so I had three options in my mind. One, this Jesus guy, he's crazy. Two, he's completely prideful, trying to persuade people and lie to them. Or three, he's actually telling the truth. Hello, my name is Gustaf Klint and I am social media coordinator for the Stockholm International Christian Church. I'm part of a noble family here in Stockholm. I'm related to the world-renowned abstract artist Hilma af Klint, and this is my story of how I went from atheist to Christian. I was atheist all my life up until 4 years ago. That's when I started really thinking about and delving into Christianity and faith as a general concept. I grew up here in Stockholm, Sweden, and my parents, quite early into my life, divorced very sadly, as with most kids in my generation. With that, I ended up living with my mom, who had an atheistic mind and was brought up in that way as well. When I went on into my teens, I started considering Christianity and faith a little bit more and thought about, maybe there could be something out there. But as an atheist, I still saw that there was a lot of people around laughing at Christianity, at the idea of a God being there. And I didn't make much more of it until I became like 15, 16 years old, having just started in high school. With my mom being so much against Christianity and what it stood for, but my dad being for it, I thought to myself, maybe I should go check it out on my own. But in order to not hurt my mom and side with my dad, I thought, let me take the middle road, which would be to go to one of the local churches here. In that way, I wouldn't be asking my dad or going to my mom, so it wouldn't be as partisan. And when I went to this church, which was part of the Stockholm, Svenska kyrkan, the Swedish church that encompasses the entire country, I studied there for about 3 months. And when I was there, we didn't open up the Bible a single time. In fact, they gave me a bracelet of pearls. Then shortly after, they gave me a psalm book. We spoke about 10 minutes each session, which was in total an hour. About 10 minutes each session about God and the existence of God and His love for us. But really there was nothing more after that. After that, there was only games and fun. And I thought to myself, why are we here if we are only to partake in fun activities and so on? Is this not about the meaning of life? And I came to a point of frustration. I was really frustrated with the way they had built up this. And in my mind, how can I be getting more references in school to, say, scientific literature and why we get taught what we get taught in school and references to that. And when I come here to study the Bible, which is supposed to be the meaning of life according to the people who study with me, they don't even show me references or speak about references to the Bible. And yet they are supposed to be Christian. At the end of those 3 months, I sent in an email to the Swedish church. I told them basically, if we don't open up the Bible, which is supposed to be the basis of your belief, if we don't open it up the next time I come around, I will quit studying here. And they never replied to that email. I'm not sure if it was the fact of a 16 or 15-year-old that sent that email that, pushed them away, or if there was something else. But they ended up not replying, and I thought, okay, well, let's go on my merry way I'll maybe look at Christianity later in my life. I became 18 years old and I started studying in university up in Uppsala. And I was studying something called ethology and animal welfare. A lot of biology and evolution went into that course part of my favorite subjects. And then I started moving in with my dad at the time in order to also be closer to the university, but also because I had not lived with him for all these years. So when I moved in, and he's a medical doctor here in Stockholm, I was a bit baffled to see that he was still believing in God. And I thought to myself, here is a researcher and a doctor, a scientist, who believes in God and claims that he exists. But how can that be, with everyone else seemingly in this country being atheist? And I started asking some questions, but most of all I saw his lifestyle, and the lifestyle that he was living with his new wife, both of them having a belief in God. And I was starting to ask about how could they have such successful careers, the lifestyle, the conflict solving, and they both said that it was because of the Bible. Now, the Bible to me was simply another philosophy book, a 2,000-year-old relic, which we have been using somewhat in society. But when I heard that it was applicable practically and that they give that the credit for their achievements in their life, that was something powerful to hear. With everyone around, you would always hear that people give credit to themselves for their achievements, and that would make sense. Well, but in this case, they said that their achievements was because of something else and because of a book. To me, giving gratitude to a book for your achievements made no sense. So I started asking, so what about the Bible? What about Christianity? And the existence of God? How can you believe in that as a scientist? And he said, well, I could tell you. And I said, well, yes, please. Can we look at the Bible together? And he said no. And when he said no, I thought, well, why not? You've been wanting to show us this for me and my brother's entire youth, and now you tell me no? And then he said, well, you and me, we are father and son. So if you were to study the Bible with me, you would get a biased view. And I don't want you to become a Christian just because I am. I want you to become a Christian because it's the right thing to do. And that really, that really put something on my heart, because if this is about truth, then in the end he would want that. He would want me to find out for myself that this is true, independent of what he is doing. And this is just a scientific view. So I loved it, and I started studying the Bible with someone else from the same church. But then let's just say that the Swedish pride kicked in, and the pride of an atheist, and I came there to argue, because in my mind, if God is real, he would be able to survive all the arguments I threw at him. So I threw all my arguments, scientifically, morally, everything I could, just at the Bible and at God, to see whether it would survive. Now, when I was doing this, there was for the first time, I think, in my life that I've been called prideful. So the one who studied with me, he ended up telling me, well, if you want to come here and learn, it would be better for you to ask questions rather than coming and accusing. In my pride, I said, well, fine then I'll stop studying. And then I left for about approximately 2 years. And then 2 years later, after having been in almost 8 years of consistent pornography watching. I'd played a lot of computer games at this point. I calculated quite recently all the hours that I've been playing computer games, and it was over a year's worth of hours. So let's just say I wasn't really doing a lot with my time. And all the things that I was telling people, which was work hard, get up early, make sure that you have good relationships, don't watch porn. All these things I said to people, and I'd philosophized with people in like groups and been sort of a psychologist to my friends for quite a while, but I was doing all of them myself. And that level of hypocrisy was so annoying and so saddening that in the end I was really getting to a point of depression. I was thinking, oh, what am I even doing? This is meaningless to talk to people about if I'm not doing it myself. So I need to look for someone who clearly has an example in not being a hypocrite. And the first one I could think of was my dad. with his great example in life. And then I thought, well, what example does he have? Well, apparently this was Christ and Jesus in the Bible. That was sort of a frustrating answer to me at the time. And I thought, okay, I'll give it another shot. There's a saying here in Sweden, you have your truth and I have mine. But that's not how truth works. And truth, in fact, is always objective, independent of time, independent of person, independent of where you are in the world. And this is what I was looking for. I was incredibly frustrated with that people would use this argument of you have your truth, when really what people mean to say by this is you have your view of the truth. But truth will remain the same independent of your views. And so people would use this as an excuse not to have to look for the truth. In fact, people would use this as a way to actually commit a lot of evil things. It's like if I say pornography is wrong, but then someone else would say, well, that's your truth. No, it's simply the truth. It's simply evil. And people would use this to such a degree that even when I was arguing about the evil actions of Hitler, people would say, well, he was having his truth. He was doing what he thought was best. Sure, he was, but does that make it okay? So what we need is not subjective morals. Subjective morals leads people to be able to do whatever they want. If there is in fact no God, then you can do whatever you like. If there is no God, all you have is your subjective morality that you try to force on top of others. But that's not how morality truly is. We have something called a conscience, and I knew that the things that I was doing was in fact evil. So I just needed something greater than me. When people look for truth, they say look for it on the inside. Look at you. But if you go and look more at yourself, all you're going to find is more of yourself. What I realized was that as someone who's been acting like a hypocrite, as someone who's been lying, how am I to be able to trust myself on an issue so big as the truth of life? So what I needed to do was to look outside of myself for something greater than me. In the same way, we cannot look to other people for the truth, because other people are still going to be just as flawed as we are. So when we see other people, they are not going to have the truth. We need something objective, something greater than a human being to be able to provide the full truth, which I was hoping to then find in Christianity or religion, because clearly the first time was not wholehearted enough. Clearly, I didn't let God show himself and how I should pursue him in his way. And that was also the time when I realized that you cannot actually prove God with science. A lot of atheists walk around and think that you can make your way to God and an understanding of God using scientific or logical principles that you would usually use with other things in life. But that's not true. If God exists, only He would be able to set the perfect way and the best way and the only way to be able to find Him. And in our pride, we think that we can go about it in any way we want, when He's already set the principles that lead us to Him. Those principles were in the Bible. I'd been studying different philosophies and religions and all kinds of stuff up until this point. Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and none of them had changed my life for the better. A lot of philosophy arguing made me very good at arguments and so on, but it didn't change my lifestyle. And so I wanted to make sure that this next thing what I just needed was something practical. I started looking into the Bible again. I came back and apologized for my pride previously. I said, okay, this time I'm going to seek God in the way that He determined I should seek Him in the Bible, not the way I want to prove that He exists. And as it turns out, seeking God is a relationship building, not a theoretical course. So when you seek God, you end up building a relationship with Him. And in any relationship, if you start throwing accusations at the other person, you will have a very terrible relationship. I decided this time, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to accuse. I'm going to see, what does He argue I should do? And how should I go about life? And then I'll check out, why should I do that rather than why shouldn't I do that? I read through the New Testament, and in 3 weeks I went from complete atheist to fully devoted Christian. What I realized at this time was that the view I'd had of Christianity up until then was completely false. Most people do not live out true Christianity. In Sweden, Christianity is all based around feelings and what people perceive as right in their own minds. But very few actually read the Bible, and I recognized this even as I came to the Swedish church. In fact, I was on a late night talk show with the pastor of the Swedish church, Storkyrkan here in Stockholm, and she got the question, "Do you believe in God?" And she ended up answering no. That told me very clearly that there's a very skewed perspective of what a Christian is and what a believer is here in Sweden. So I cannot rely on the experiences I've had. Could it be, however, that the people are wrong and that the Bible is right? This was what I started exploring when I started reading the Bible. And I came to find out, in fact, that most of Christianity, Catholicism, Protestantism, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, all of them have deep doctrinal flaws. And they have traditions that are not biblical. What it came down to was really, after 3 weeks of having studied and seeing that it changed my life tremendously, the pornography stopped happening. And in fact, that if you're supposed to be a Christian, you cannot be a hypocrite. And that was such a relief to hear, because all the other Christians I'd heard out there, they were hypocrites. That's what I'd been seeing. They preached one thing but did another thing. Realizing that Jesus himself preached against hypocrisy made me also understand that maybe the Christianity I'd seen is actually not Christianity at all. What we have here in Sweden is hobby groups, not Christianity. Coming to the last day before I became a disciple, right before I got baptized, I looked at my life and how it had changed in these 3 weeks. And I was impressed with the practicality of the Bible. Now came the question, is this just someone human or several people who've gotten this document very right and seen life principles and evaluated them correctly? And this is why this works. And in fact, there's still not a God. Looking at it and just how over hundreds of years they had been consistent in the message, that was powerful to see. But also just to realize what faith actually is according to the Bible. Faith is not a feeling. Faith is a choice. And so I had 3 options in my mind. 1, this Jesus guy, he's crazy, because no one says the things that he does. I mean, I'm the way, the truth, and life. Who says something like that? No other religious person has ever claimed such a statement. 2, he is completely prideful and is using this for his own gain, trying to persuade people and lie to them. Or 3, he's actually telling the truth. There was enough evidence to know that Jesus had existed as a historical person, so I thought, okay, well, one of these 3 it's got to be. Could it be that he was crazy? If he was crazy, his principles, and certainly not all of them, would not be working. Not practically, and especially not 2,000 years later. 2, could it be that he was prideful and a liar? Well, in the documents of the Bible, he actually calls us to live exactly like he did. If you have a hypocrite preaching a certain message, and you live exactly as they do, you will find out that their principles is not working or that they're not living according to their message. A hypocrite and a liar will not know the full truth. And the final thing that came to me was, okay, he must be telling the truth then. I was quite shocked by that. It was a powerful thing to see, but also quite scary. And in the end, I decided, okay, I wanted to find out the truth. If this is the truth, which I now believe it actually is, then I need to bet my life on it. So these last couple of years, since I became a Christian, I've abandoned my dream to become a zoologist. I moved countries, and then I was in the war zone during the Ukraine. I moved back here to Sweden to help start a church. If there's any message that I would like to give, is that you've not experienced true Christianity. You will only experience true Christianity by acting out the Bible. That's Jesus' only solution for finding out the truth. This has been my testimony for how I went from atheist to Christian. Thank you very much for listening.